So today, we're diving into a really sobering new report on Pakistan's security. It's from the Pakistan Institute for Conflict and Security Studies, or PICSS. And honestly, their findings for 2025 are deeply alarming. And it all starts with one shocking number. And the report kicks off with this one stark figure, 73%. That's the increase in combat-related deaths in just a single year, from 2024 to 2025. Now, a number that high, that's not just a statistic, right? It's a signal that there's been a fundamental and really dangerous shift in the country's security. So what exactly is behind that 73% jump? Well, the PICSS report calls 2025 a year of marked escalation. And what that really means is it wasn't just that there were more incidents of violence, but that the incidents themselves became so much more deadly. And when you look at the raw numbers behind that percentage, wow, they're just as stark. Look at this. We're talking a jump from just under 2,000 deaths in 2024 all the way up to nearly 3,400 in 2025. That visual leap you see from one bar to the next, it just shows the sheer scale of this escalation. And look, this wasn't just a bad year. It was a year of some really grim historical milestones. For security forces, it was the deadliest year they've seen since 2011. For civilians, the worst in a whole decade. And yeah, even for the militants themselves, fatalities hit a high not seen since 2015. So basically, no one was left untouched by this surge. Okay, so let's actually break those numbers down a bit more because we really need to understand the human cost here. Who exactly was most affected by all this violence? So you can see here, militants themselves made up the huge majority of the deaths. We're talking 62%, or over 2,100 killed. But of course, that still leaves a really heavy toll on the other side. Security forces and civilians, they made up that remaining 38% of all fatalities. Okay, so here's where we get into the really hard data. Militant deaths, they more than doubled, 122% jump. Just incredible. But then you look at the impact on everyone else. Fatalities for both security forces and civilians shot up by about a quarter. And this is critical. Injuries for security personnel surged by 62%. That tells you just how intense the fighting they were facing really was. So that brings up the big question, right? What was driving this massive surge in violence? Well, the report points to a really clear evolution in tactics. This wasn't just more of the same old thing. The actual nature of the conflict was changing. And it really all starts with just the sheer volume. In 2025, Pakistan saw over 1,000 separate terrorist attacks. And just to put that into perspective for you, that is the highest annual total the country has seen in more than a decade, going all the way back to 2014. Now, one of the key things driving up the death toll was a really disturbing trend, a 53% rise in suicide bombings. That's not an accident. That points to a clear strategic choice by militant groups to deliberately cause as many casualties as possible and to spread as much fear as they can. The report also flags a growing technological threat, and that's the use of small drones. We saw 33 recorded incidents, and what that tells us is that militants are getting really good at adapting commercially available tech for their attacks. And that, of course, opens up a whole new, really difficult front for the security forces to deal with. And the conflict wasn't just intensifying in terms of direct attacks either. Kidnappings by militants, they just skyrocketed, up 162%. So what was the response? Well, security forces ramped up their own operations, and arrests of suspected terrorists jumped by 83%. It just shows you the entire conflict cycle, from abductions to counter-terror ops, was just accelerating like crazy. All right, so we've covered the what and the how, but what about the where? Where exactly was all of this violence concentrated? The report is pretty clear on the regional hotspots. It's probably not a surprise to many of you, but the report shows the conflict was, once again, overwhelmingly concentrated in two provinces, right there on the border with Afghanistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. These areas have long been the epicenters of militancy, and in 2025, they really bore the brunt of the violence. And this quote from a police official in the Bannu district, it really brings the stark local reality behind all these national numbers home. He said 27 cops were martyred in 134 terrorist attacks in the district in 2025. Just think about that. That's the human cost in just one of the country's many, many districts. Okay, so now let's kind of zoom out for a minute and put all of these findings into a wider context. What are the geopolitical factors going on here? And where does Pakistan even stand on the global stage? Well, to put this into a global perspective, the 2025 Global Terrorism Index actually ranked Pakistan as the second most impacted nation by terrorism in the entire world. So this really isn't just a national issue. The trends we're seeing in this PICSS report, they reflect a crisis that has global significance. And a huge piece of this puzzle, a key part of the backdrop, is the relationship with Afghanistan. See, Pakistan's position is that the TTP is using Afghan soil as a safe haven, and they're demanding that the Afghan Taliban take action. But the Taliban, for their part, deny that they're letting this happen. And this diplomatic standoff, it's a major factor that's just fueling the ongoing violence. So, when you boil it all down, the main takeaway from the PICSS report is really unambiguous. In 2025, pretty much every single indicator of security in Pakistan, from the number of fatalities to the kinds of attacks, went downhill, and went downhill significantly. It really puts the nation at a critical crossroads. And all of this really leaves us with one profound and pretty difficult question. With violence hitting a decade-long high, and with tactics evolving on both sides of the conflict, what on earth will it take to finally break this devastating cycle?